Hey there, night dwellers. Welcome back to Nightmare Frequency. Before we descend into tonight's chilling tale, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, get cozy, and prepare yourself for another journey into the unknown.
Rain tapped insistently against the attic window as Mara settled into the worn armchair, the single lamp's golden glow pooling across a stack of notebooks. She'd always been a skeptic. Ghosts, shadows at the end of the bed, phantom footsteps. Nothing more than tricks of sleep and overactive imaginations. Yet tonight, she was determined to prove herself wrong by recording her own episode of the late-night show True Scary Stories to Fall Asleep. She pressed record, her voice calm. The first story was innocuous, a child's lullaby drifting through empty hallways. As she narrated, a cold breeze slithered across her neck, though every window was firmly shut. Mara paused, her breath catching. For a heartbeat, she considered ending the session, but professionalism and curiosity kept her voice steady. She moved to the next tale, about an old woman whose reflection bled fragments of her life with each passing night. Halfway through, the lamp flickered. Shadows in the corners of the attic seemed to deepen, as if pulling themselves out of the very walls. She told the story of the widow in white, who wandered moonlit roads searching for her lost child. The scratching began then, soft at first like fingernails against plaster. It grew louder, circling the room, as if something paced just beyond her sight. Mara stifled a shudder and continued, her voice a whisper now, weaving images of spectral forms sliding beneath doors and whispering names in voices not quite human. A crash sounded behind her, and the recorder's red light blinked. She froze, every muscle taut. Footsteps, deliberate heavy, crossed the floor. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared the microphone would pick it up. The scratching paused, then resumed faster, closer. A low moan filled the corners of the attic, a sound like wind funneling through bone. Mara's rational mind reeled, but she pressed on, describing the final story. A traveler lost on a country road who followed a lantern's glow into the woods, only to vanish into the mist. She trailed off, voice trembling as the temperature plunged. Her breath misted in the air. The lamp snapped out, plunging her into darkness so thick it felt alive. She fumbled for her phone's flashlight. The beam caught something in the far corner. A hunched figure, its head unnaturally tilted, long limbs folded impossibly at the joints. The recorder lay at her feet, its red light flickering weakly. She dared not scream. Instead, she forced herself forward, words stuck in her throat. The figure glided toward her, each movement jerky like a broken marionette. Adrenaline surged. Mara slammed her boot into the recorder, smashing it to shards. At the same moment, the figure froze, its hollow eyes locking onto hers. She flung her phone's light upward, illuminating its face. A pale mask stretched tight over cheekbones sharper than knives, lips pulled back in a grin devoid of warmth. A rasping voice echoed around her. "Thank you for telling our stories." She bolted, heart threatening to burst, scrambling down the narrow stairwell. The attic door slammed itself shut, wood splintering under unseen force. Behind her, the low moan turned into a cacophony of laughter, thousands of voices chanting her name. She burst into the living room and yanked the front door open, rain lashing her face as she tumbled onto the porch. Safe in the light of the street lamp, she dared to look back. The attic window glowed dimly, and for a fleeting moment, a pale hand pressed against the glass. Then the light died. Mara left everything behind that night, the recorder, the notebooks, even her keys. She drove until the roar of the storm subsided, stopping only when dawn's pale fingers touched the horizon. By the time she returned, the old house sat abandoned, windows dark, no sign she'd ever been there. Weeks later, reports surfaced of travelers stranded on obscure country roads, whispering of a lantern in the woods and a voice inviting them closer. At local radio stations, callers swore they heard faint laughter and footsteps behind the host who opened her show with the words, "Tonight, we share the real scary stories to fall asleep." Mara never recorded another episode, but sometimes in the dead of night, she wakes to the scrape of fingernails on her window pane and the distant echo of her own voice telling tales she can no longer believe were fiction.
Story number 2.
The wind howled through the skeletal trees as Elena slipped off the gravel road and into the abandoned fairground. Moonlight glinted off rusted rides, their once bright paint now chipped and faded. She'd come seeking answers. Her younger brother had gone missing here 5 years ago, and every theory had led back to this place of rust and ruin. Clutching her flashlight, Elena passed under the broken archway that once read, "Welcome to Merryweather's Carnival." Whispers of laughter seemed to drift on the breeze, seeping from the shadows between the corroded carousel horses. She swallowed hard, reminding herself this was real life, not childhood nightmares. Step by step, she advanced toward the Ferris wheel's skeletal frame. As her beam swept across the boarded-up ticket booth, she caught a glimpse of movement. A pale shape darting behind the concession stands. Heart pounding, she called out, voice echoing unnaturally loud. "Jake, is that you?" Silence answered. She forced herself forward, descending into the belly of the grounds. The scent of decay grew stronger. Rotted cotton candy, old popcorn, something fouler. She found footprints in the dust, small, bare, as though a child had padded through just hours ago. Elena's chest tightened. Could time here be twisted? Ahead, the tunnel of mirrors stood open. She hesitated, then stepped inside. Her flashlight fractured into dozens of shards, each reflection warping her face into grotesque grins. She moved slowly, pressing against the cool glass, until one mirror rippled like water. A pale hand shot through, dragging Elena off her feet. She gasped, her flashlight clattering to the floor. Darkness swallowed her. Distant giggles and the creak of swings set her nerves ablaze. She scrambled up and bolted through the mirror's surface, finding herself in a room lit by a single swaying lamp. The walls were plastered with faded photographs of missing children, dozens of them, eyes scratched out, their names scrawled beneath in faded ink. At the room's center, a carousel horse stood on a blood-stained platform, its empty saddle rocking. A soft voice called her name. Elena spun. There in the shadows stood a gaunt figure in a tattered ringmaster's coat, his face hidden beneath a top hat so tall it brushed the ceiling. His eyes shone like coals as he tipped the hat. "You came back," he whispered. What have you done with him?" Elena demanded, voice trembling. The ringmaster gestured, and the carousel horse's painted eyes bled shadow. The platform creaked, and with a screech the horse spun toward her. Elena backed away as the room's temperature plummeted. The lamp's flame guttered, casting the ringmaster's face into sharp relief. A skull's grin stretched impossibly wide. "You brought stories," he hissed. "Now you become part of the show." Elena lunged for the door, but it slammed shut. She pounded on the glass panels, but they rippled like oil. Behind her, the photographs began to peel, the scratched-out eyes suddenly staring back, weeping black tears. The carousel's pulse quickened, and laughter filled the chamber, hollow and exultant. Summoning every ounce of courage, Elena locked eyes with the ringmaster. "My brother isn't yours," she said, voice firm despite the quake in her limbs. "Release him." He inclined his head. "A bargain," he crooned. "Tell his story, and he's free." Elena swallowed, knowing this was her darkest moment. She began to speak, her voice echoing as she recounted Jake's final day here, pouring truth and love into every word. She spoke of his laughter, his wonder at the carnival lights, and the kindness he'd shown to shy strangers. As she spoke, the photographs rustled, the black tears drying. The carousel slowed, the laughter fading. When her voice broke on the final memory, the lamp flared bright. The ringmaster's grin faltered. With a click, the door swung open. Elena ran, not daring to look back. She burst into the moonlit fairground and saw Jake, older now, pale but unharmed, standing beneath the Ferris wheel. His face lit up when he saw her. She raced to him, pulling him into a tight embrace as the fairground faded behind them. The carousel's mournful whinny echoing once before silence reclaimed the night. They never spoke of what happened inside. Words felt too small. But years later, whenever Elena closed her eyes and recalled the carnival's shadows, she could still hear that single hollow laugh, and she knew some bargains echo forever.
Story number 3.
Snow swirled against the windows of Black Pine Lodge as Clara tightened the scarf around her neck and carried her duffel through the silent lobby. She'd agreed to cover for the regular caretaker who'd vanished without a trace 2 weeks earlier. It was supposed to be easy. Welcomed by blizzard warnings, She'd check supplies, light the stove, and settle in until spring. Instead, the air inside tasted of old ice and something colder, something alive. That first night, Clara found the caretaker's logbook on the front desk. The last entry trembled across the page. They whisper in the walls, I can't. The scrawl stopped halfway through a word. Her heart thumped, but she shrugged it off as cabin fever. Snow had cut off the access road. No deliveries until morning. Around midnight, she woke to scraping from the attic above her room. The lodge's corridors were pitch black. Her lantern cast long, quivering shadows on worn pine panels. Clara climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking underfoot. At the attic door, the scraping ceased. She paused, breath fogging in the beam's glow. Faint drumming, like fingernails tapping, echoed just beyond the door. Then the walls themselves pulsed, as if breathing. She flung it open. The attic lay empty, crates of guest luggage stacked in corners. But the far wall, frost had formed in a perfect handprint, fingers splayed accusingly. Clara's lantern flickered. When the light steadied, the handprint was gone. Yet on the ceiling, a message scored in frost read, Stay! She raced downstairs, slammed the door, and bolted it. Sleep eluded her. At dawn, she forced herself into the kitchen, shaking. A single coffee cup lay on the counter, smudged with tiny wet fingerprints that led toward the pantry door. Inside, shelves were pulled loose, exposing a narrow crawl space. Clara swallowed her dread and squeezed into the tunnel, lantern bobbing with each panicked step. The crawl space dropped into a low-ceilinged chamber beneath the lodge. Ice-coated pipes dripped, filling the room with rhythmic splashes. Rusted cages lined the walls, each one empty, but for ragged scraps of cloth and bone fragments. Clara's lantern trembled as the door behind her crashed shut. She spun, banging on the metal hatch, but it wouldn't budge. A whisper curled around her ear, Free us! She froze. The air turned viscous, pressing against her lungs. From the shadows, pale shapes slipped forward, translucent figures twisted in agony, their mouths stretched in silent screams. Clara fled toward the far corner where a narrow shaft of daylight slanted through a crack. She hoisted herself up, heedless of frostbite, and crawled through a chute that spat her out into the snow behind the lodge. She staggered to her feet as the wind clawed at her, nearly dragging her back. Without looking at the windows, she ran down the slope toward her car, heart hammering. Behind her, the lodge's lights flickered, one by one, in perfect, haunting sequence. When Clara reached the road, she paused. Ahead, tire tracks vanished into the drift. Behind her, the lodge's silhouette shimmered, its shape warping until the attic window glowed like a single watching eye. She sprinted to the car, fumbled the keys, and the engine roared to life. The headlights cut through the white veil as she barreled down the hill. Over her shoulder, the lodge dissolved into the storm, until only the wind remained. But on her coat sleeve, she felt it, cold and wet, a tiny handprint, pressed into her shoulder as though to say, We followed you. Clara never went back. Yet on clear, moonlit nights, she still hears the rasp of nails on wood calling her name from far-off hills. And she knows that somewhere, Black Pine Lodge endures, listening, waiting for its next caretaker to arrive.
Story number 4.
The platform was empty when Nora stepped off the train, the last shuttle of the night, its doors sliding shut behind her with a hollow clang. The station lights flickered in tired rhythms, casting long shadows across the cracked tiles. She'd come to document the forgotten line beneath the city, chasing rumors of late-night wanderers and whispered warnings scrawled on graffitied walls. As a photojournalist, she thrived on isolation. Tonight, she would be utterly alone. She padded down the tunnel, camera in hand, each click of the shutter echoing in the vaulted darkness. The air smelled stale, tinged with rust, and something fouler, old sweat, or the memory of it. Around the next bend, she found an abandoned car half submerged in rubble, its windows shattered, seats torn. Flashing her light inside, she discovered a single photograph pinned to the dashboard, a young girl in a school uniform, her eyes scratched away. A chill lurched up Nora's spine. Suddenly, the distant rumble of a train echoed, though the line was closed. She raised her lens, heart thundering, as the tunnel lit with a phantom train's headlamp. It passed without sound or weight, receding into the dark. When the glow vanished, the photograph lay on the ground, inches from her boot, as if placed there. Nora backed away, but the tunnel behind her began to shift. Tiles peeled themselves loose, revealing bones beneath, calcified and brittle. She turned to run but froze as the lights above dimmed one by one, until only a single flickering lamp remained overhead. Beneath it stood a figure, a woman in a dirty conductor's uniform, features gaunt, eyes sinking into her skull like hollows in a skull. She smiled, the skin around her mouth cracking like parched earth. "You shouldn't be here," the wraith croaked. "They don't like visitors." Nora's breath caught. The camera slid from her trembling hands, clattering to the floor. The conductor vanished, and the walls began to pulse, alive with scratches, handprints smeared in black dust, clawing at the air. A low, keening moan swelled into a chorus of voices, lost passengers begging for release. Their forms flickered at the edges of Nora's vision, transparent figures of men and women, their limbs twisted, mouths opening impossibly wide in silent screams. Desperate, Nora scrambled toward the station's far exit, the voices chasing her down the tunnel. As she neared the stairway, a cold hand gripped her ankle, and she pitched forward, rolling into darkness. Pain flared as something slithered across her back, slimy, weightless. She kicked free, panting, and lunged up the stairs into the station above. The doors locked behind her with a final clang. The light snapped back to life. The photograph of the girl lay at the top step. Nora grabbed it, horror-struck to see her own face staring back, eyes unblinking, scratched out. She never returned to the subway. But sometimes, alone in her apartment, Nora feels cold metal press against her skin, and in the deafening silence she hears the conductor's whisper, "Thank you for visiting."
Story number 5.
Edith never believed the old infirmary was truly abandoned. As the new night shift mortuary technician, she'd heard the rumors. White-clad figures drifting down the hall, cold spots that froze breath in midair, and the locked operating theater where someone was said to linger long after the lights went out. She shrugged them off as hospital folklore. Tonight, she would silence them once and for all. At 10 o'clock, the building's generators died in a single shuddering gasp. The fluorescent corridors plunged into darkness, and only the glow of Edith's flashlight guided her as she wheeled a gurney stacked with unclaimed bodies toward the freezer vault. The air grew colder with every door she passed, so cold that frost bloomed on her eyelashes. In the corner of her eye, she thought she saw a pale face stare back from the window pane that separated the morgue from the hallway, but when she turned, the glass was empty. Inside the vault, she lined the bodies on stainless steel slabs. Before she could finish, a soft tapping echoed from above the heavy door. Tap, tap, as if someone rapped impatiently on the metal. Heart pounding, Edith jabbed her flashlight upward. High on the wall, the intercom speaker grill quivered, though the panel was off. Then a low, guttural whisper drifted through it. "Let me out." She fumbled with the lock, her gloves slick with condensation. The tapping became a scratching, like fingernails dragged across ribs. Edith pried the door open a crack, and the vault lights flickered on, brilliant white slices through the gloom. The bodies lay undisturbed, but at the far end, the draped outline of one sheet-covered slab moved, carving a silhouette against the wall. Edith swallowed. She lifted the sheet, and the corpse beneath sat upright, its skull split open as though someone had peeled it back like a lid. No face remained, only a yawning black cavity that seemed to inhale the light. The slab's wheel squealed as it rolled forward, carrying its empty-eyed occupant toward her. Edith stumbled back, blood roaring in her ears. She slammed the door shut, slamming her shoulder against it until rivulets of sweat froze on her skin. Through the small viewport, she watched the slab scrape to a halt. Then a shadow slipped around the corner, a figure in tattered hospital scrubs, limbs too long, head tilted at an impossible angle. It raised a hand and tapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Edith found the emergency override and flooded the vault with dry ice haze, the white fog billowing like angry spirits. In the swirling vapor, she saw dozens of shapes lurch and twist, mouths opening in silent agony. The air filled with a chorus of rattling breaths and pleading moans. "Let us out!" With trembling fingers, she triggered the alarm and sprinted for the stairwell. Behind her, the intercom crackled to life once more, the same whisper now a chorus, "Stay with us." The stairwell door slammed against her back, and she hurled it open, racing up toward the night shift nurse's station on the second floor. By the time maintenance arrived, Edith was gone. They found the mortuary vault unlocked, dry ice melting into puddles, and everybody accounted for, except one. The slab at the far end lay empty, its sheet discarded in a perfect circle. On the stainless steel, scratched into the metal, were the words, "We came with her." No one ever replaced Edith. But late at night, security cameras capture a pale shape roaming the empty halls, its skull hollow, its fingers tapping on every locked door it passes.
Story number 6.
The moment Aaron stepped onto Blackwood Lake's rickety dock, the air changed, thickened, as though the water itself breathed around him. He'd rented the solitary cabin at the far end to finish his memoir, away from the city's roar. Local gossip whispered of swimmers who vanished beneath the mirror-flat surface, but Aaron dismissed it as small-town superstition. His first evening was peaceful. The sun dipped behind pine-clad hills, and the water glowed molten gold. He set his typewriter on the porch rail and tapped out memories of his childhood. When the moon rose, a soft voice drifted across the lake like a lullaby sung underwater. Aaron paused, listening. The words were indecipherable, yet his name seemed woven through the melody. He shrugged it off as wind through the reeds until the second night, when ripples appeared at the far shore, though no breeze stirred. The lullaby grew louder, more urgent, and lantern light on the surface formed the shape of a pale figure, hair floating like seaweed. Aaron stood frozen, heart pounding as the figure raised a slender hand and beckoned. By the third night, sleep eluded him. He dreamed of drowning, of hands with two long fingers dragging him down. In daylight, the lake looked harmless, almost cheerful, but Aaron refused to ignore the lure beneath that glassy skin. He borrowed a canoe from the cabin's shed and paddled toward the center, camera in hand, determined to capture whatever haunted these waters. Halfway across, the lullaby began again, muffled beneath the waves. The paddle seized in his grip as the canoe rocked. In the moonlight, he spotted dozens of pale shapes just beneath the surface, faces pressed to the hull, eyes wide and sorrowful. He fumbled for his flashlight, its beam shattered into the depths, illuminating skeletal arms waving in silent plea. A chilling hand broke the surface and wrapped around his wrist. Aaron yanked back, but more hands rose, clutching at the canoe's sides, splintering the wood. He scrambled back toward shore, the water spraying like knives, the lullaby swelling into a roar of voices crying his name. He made it to the dock and sprinted up the narrow path to the cabin. Behind him, the lake churned as if furious. Inside, he locked every door and tossed his typewriter aside. In a panic, he wrenched open the supply closet and found a flare gun. Heart hammering, he burst back outside and aimed at the water, fired into the heart of Blackwood Lake. The flare arced overhead and struck the surface with a hiss. The song snapped shut. Beneath the glow, dozens of pale forms sank back into darkness, leaving only black ripples. Aaron dropped to his knees, trembling, hands scorched by the flare's recoil. He didn't wait for dawn. Packing only his essentials, he fled in his car, lake and lullaby receding in his rearview mirror. Weeks later, alone in his city apartment, Aaron heard it again, soft as a sigh, threading through the pipes, calling his name.
Story number 7.
Claire slipped through the heavy curtain and onto the deserted stage of the old Grand Majestic Theater, the overhead footlights humming in near darkness. As the newly hired night shift stagehand, she planned to adjust the rigging before tomorrow's opening night. The air was thick with the scent of rosin and faded velvet, and every distant echo of her footsteps seemed to linger too long. She flipped on her flashlight, sweeping its beam over painted flats mottled with chipped paint. In the prop room to her left, rows of life-size mannequins stood draped in moth-eaten costumes, their blank faces frozen in half-frozen smiles. A single script lay on a dusty table, its pages yellowed, The Lost Performance. Claire frowned. No one had mentioned a play by that name. On the cover, a line was scrawled in crimson ink, They want an audience. She climbed the side stairs to the grid above the stage. As she loosened a rope, a whisper skated across the rafters. Encore, encore, she paused, heart pounding. Only the hum of the lights answered. On the stage floor below, her flashlight caught the glint of something metallic near the orchestra pit. Leaning over, she discovered a small brass key etched with a winged mask. Before she could ponder its purpose, the house lights snapped on, flooding empty rows of seats in sickly gold. From the gloom, footsteps tapped across the stage, 2323 in perfect rhythm. Claire ducked behind a painted column, breath shallow. A shadow passed where no one stood. She crept down to the orchestra pit and found a trapdoor concealed by rotted floorboards. The whispering rose to a chorus, "Perform, perform." Gathering courage, she slid the boards aside and lifted the door. A stale draft exhaled from below. Heart in her throat, she descended into a narrow shaft. The trapdoor slammed shut behind her. Her flashlight bobbed as she reached the bottom. A vaulted corridor lined with dusty dressing rooms, doors hanging ajar. Inside each, cracked mirrors reflected dozens of pale faces staring back. Actors in full makeup, eyes wide and unblinking. No bodies remained. From the end of the hall, a single dressing room door creaked open on its own. Claire approached, key in hand. The script's title lay scrawled in blood on the door. Act 1, The Awakening. She swallowed hard and turned the key. The door swung into a circular chamber ringed with hooks, each holding a cracked mask. In the center, a rusted music box played a warbling tune. As she stepped forward, the masks lifted from their hooks, levitating and rotating to face her, their empty eyes turning in unison. A voice, deep and hollow, echoed through the chamber, "You must perform." The music box stuttered, and the masks descended like flocks of birds. Claire backed away and lunged at the music box, smashing it beneath her boot. The melody stuttered to silence, and with a thunderous crack, the masks clattered to the floor. Above, the trapdoor lifted slowly. Claire didn't hesitate. She sprinted up the shaft and scrambled back onto the stage, wrenching the door shut behind her. Dust and rusted hinges rained down as the hidden room sealed itself. The overhead lights died in a single breath, and only the footlights glowed dimly. She burst through the front doors into the cool night air, key in hand and heart pounding. At dawn, the theater's manager boarded over the trapdoor on Claire's insistence. He looked at the rusted plank she'd nailed in place, then down at the key she offered. But the brass had turned to ash in her palm. Claire never returned after that night. The grand majestic theater sat silent, its stage curtains unmoved. Yet sometimes in the hush of an empty auditorium, she swore she heard a distant music box, the faintest warbling lullaby, waiting for someone to turn the key again.
Story number 8.
The studio was silent when Mara slipped inside just before midnight. As producer of the late-night horror podcast Night Whispers, she chased every urban legend, but this tape was different. No byline, no source, just a brittle reel labeled "Sleep Tight." With a shrug, she queued it up live on air. At first, the hiss and crackle were ordinary, distant static in a low, droning hum. Then a voice emerged, soft and deliberate, intoning names. Elias Payne, Charlotte Rivers, Gabriel Cruz. Listeners' calls pinged in. "Those are real missing persons." Mara's pulse quickened. She tried to cut the feed, but the studio controls froze. Every dial and slider locked in place as the voice continued, each syllable twisting the silence into a snarl. Behind her, the door clicked shut. The overhead fluorescence flickered and died, plunging the booth into a yellow-tinged gloom. The tape hissed on, the voice now whispering personal secrets, her mother's hidden debts, a mistake Mara had buried years ago. Panic burned hot in her chest. She lunged for the reel-to-reel, but the tape yanked itself from the spool, spinning free and wrapping around her arm like live wire. She tore it loose and hurled the reel into the air. It landed with a dull thud in the darkened studio's control room. Through the glass, she saw shapes coalesce behind the mixing desk. Tall, thin figures whose eyes glowed with hungry light. They pressed closer to the soundproof window, faces drawn with desperation. Mara's voice trembled as she keyed the mic. "If you're out there, I'm sorry." The tape's voice faltered, then resumed, only it was softer now, mournful. "Tell our story." Summoning every ounce of courage, Mara began to speak into the microphone, recounting each missing person's life, their birthdays, dreams, the laughter they left behind. As she spoke, the figures outside recoiled, dissolving at the edges. The tape's hum slowed, then stuttered as though caught in a storm. Finally, the light snapped back. The control room door swung open. Mara slumped against the console, breath ragged. The reel lay still on the floor, its label smudged and blank. She picked it up gently, the whisper gone. When dawn broke, the studio was empty. No spirits, no tape. But every listener's call log showed the names she'd spoken, now crossing off cold cases one by one. Mara never aired another midnight broadcast, but sometimes, When the air is still, she can still hear her own voice, waiting for someone to listen.
Story number 9.
Dr. Lauren Reeves pried open the heavy hatch of the Ellison Undersea Research Outpost and let the stale, recycled air wash over her. At 3,000 meters below the surface, sunlight no longer reached this steel and glass capsule, buried in eternal midnight. She was here to study bioluminescent plankton, but as the station's new lead biologist, she had expected only cold water and silence. On her first night, the sonar pinged in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, pause. The digital display labeled it unknown object. She suited up in the narrow airlock and opened the outer door just enough to peer into the black, only a faint glow like distant fireflies drifting in a storm. Shaking off an uneasy shiver, she retracted the door. At dinner in the communal module, she reviewed video logs from the previous crew. The last recording ended abruptly. Dr. Ellison himself, eyes wide behind his helmet, pointing off camera and whispering, "Do you see her?" Then static. No rescue team had ever arrived. That night, Lauren lay in her bunk when something tapped on the hull, a slow, deliberate scratching that sounded like metal being carved by something sharp. She threw off the blanket and crept to the viewport, nothing but inky water pressed against the glass. Yet just beyond the station's glow, a figure drifted. A woman in a torn, barnacled wetsuit, helmet cracked, hand raised as if begging to come inside. Lauren's breath fogged the glass. The next morning, she found footprints in the wet lab's condensation, three-toed prints that vanished at the door to the supply locker. Inside, a single waterlogged diving glove lay on the floor. She traced her fingertip through the mud, feeling a pulse of dread. Over the following days, the scratches returned on every module. The hydroponics room, the observatory, even the central corridor. Each time the ghostly diver appeared in the water. At odd hours, always the same distance away, watching. Lauren tried to record her, but the cameras died whenever the figure drew near. On the 7th night, lights flickered, and the station's hum dropped to a silent whine. Oxygen levels dipped. Alarms blared. Lauren scrambled into the control room. The outer hull had sprung a leak, tiny cracks spidering over the viewport. As she keyed the repair protocols, the temperature plunged. Her breath came fast as a hand, cold, gloved, closed around her wrist. She spun. No one was there. The hatch to the emergency pod slid open. Instinct drove her inside. She slammed the door. The pod sealed, and the station's lights went out completely. In the darkness, the tapping resumed, so close it rattled the bulkhead. Lauren flicked on the pod's emergency lamp. The diver stood in the hatch's viewport. Helmet glass spidered with cracks, eyes empty holes reflecting her own terrified stare. Lauren hit the launch lever. The pod shot upward through the water column, emergency ballast burning off as the station receded into the abyss. Outside the viewport, she watched the diver drift after the outpost, hands still outstretched, disappearing into the black. Hours later, rescue ships broke the surface. Lauren was hauled aboard, shaking but alive. She refused to speak until her debrief, when she pressed a single waterproof photograph into her supervisor's hand, a frame from the pod camera, showing her own reflection, and standing directly behind her in the cramped cockpit, the helmeted silhouette of a drowned woman. The search teams later found the outpost's remains, its hull warped, no signs of Ellison's original crew. But deep-sea drones recording its final moments captured something far more chilling, a shape drifting away into the dark, hands still raised in silent plea.
Story number 10.
The neon sign outside the Twilight Pines motel buzzed like a dying creature as Matt pulled his battered guitar case from the trunk. Rain spattered the cracked asphalt in cold pinprick rhythms. He'd booked room 12 for the night, just a stopover on his cross-country tour, but as he stepped inside the lobby, the air tasted of mildew and something older, like memory. The clerk handed him a key without a word. The hallway was dimly lit, carpets damp where the ceiling had leaked. When Matt slid the key into room 12, he heard it. A faint lullaby drifting through the bathroom vent, notes so soft they seemed to float on the stale air. He paused in the doorway, heart pounding. No children traveled this late. Inside, the room was bare. A sagging bed, a threadbare armchair, and the bathroom door closed tight. Matt cracked it open and shone his phone light into pale tile. No pipes or fans whined, only the lullaby, louder now, its notes twisting around each other in a plea. He pressed an ear to the vent, Somewhere on the other side, tiny fingers tapped against metal. Against every instinct, he lured the melody with a whisper. "Who's there?" The lullaby stuttered, then stopped. Silence. When he reached for the vent cover, it swung free in his hand, screws rusted through. Behind it yawned a dark shaft, and at its bottom a faint glow. Matt found the floor panel under the sink loose, pried it up, and climbed down into a narrow crawl space slick with condensation. The air grew colder, each breath a puff of mist. At the end of the tunnel, he emerged beneath the bathroom floor into a low-ceilinged chamber. A single porcelain crib sat in the center, a cracked music box resting on its edge, its glass dome shattered, gears still ticking. Matt knelt, and the lullaby resumed, warbling through the broken box. Toys littered the floor, a teddy bear whose button eyes gouged hollows in the dust, a rag doll whose stitched smile had unraveled. Out of the shadows stepped a child no older than 6, pale as moonlight, hair plastered to her scalp. Behind her hovered a woman in a faded nightgown, eyes sunken but fierce with sorrow. Matt's throat seized. "Where's my cradle?" the child whispered, voice hollow. "My mummy took it away." Matt swallowed. "I'm sorry, I found your music box." He reached for his guitar case and pulled out his guitar, his only gift in the dark. He strummed a gentle chord, then improvised a soft melody, weaving it into the old lullaby. The chamber trembled with each note. The child's head tilted, tears of shadow leaking down her cheeks. The woman's form flickered like candlelight in a breeze. As Matt's song swelled, the music box's gears slowed, its ticking merging with the guitar's hum. Finally, the box unwound completely, the melody easing to silence. The child placed a tiny hand on Matt's knee, and in that touch he felt a cold weight lift. The woman's nightgown faded to mist, drifting upward until the ceiling swallowed her. The crib dissolved into dust, toys scattering like petals on the crawlspace floor. Matt crawled back through the tunnel, heart hammering. He replaced the floor panel, reattached the vent cover, and burst into the bathroom, gasping for warm air. The lullaby was gone. He packed before dawn and checked out without speaking. As he drove away, the motel's neon took on a softer glow, no longer buzzing, but humming a gentle refrain. Matt glanced at his rearview mirror, sure he saw a pale face in the window, the little girl's eyes bright with gratitude. That night in his next town's venue, Matt tuned his guitar. A single chord rang out, clear, pure, and beneath it, almost imperceptible, the faintest hint of a lullaby.